I'm Leanne Evans, and this is Northwest Newsweek Year in Review. Over the past few years, many communities in the far north have been dealing with a suicide epidemic, which finally came to a head in 2017, when many First Nations began demanding action from the provincial and federal governments. In January, that was the subject that dominated discussions at the Winter Chiefs Assembly of the Anishinaabe Nation. Molly Fromer reports.
The annual Winter Chiefs Assembly began with a grand entry of the chiefs representing 49 Anishinaabe Nation communities. The main discussion on this, the first day of the conference, was a suicide crisis that occurred in Wapeka earlier this month. Nan Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler and community leaders met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Ottawa last week, asking for immediate action involving the crisis. Fiddler says Trudeau was open to listening, but in the end, no concrete commitments came, despite the urgency of the situation. But Fiddler says they are overwhelmed that a private donor had stepped in where the Government of Canada has failed.
We're all encouraged by the level of participation that we're seeing, not just from our community, but just Canadians in general, that they want to be involved, they want to be engaged, and we saw that with the private donor stepping up and wanting to do the right thing, and we know that there's more out there that want to help.
At one point during the assembly, everyone bowed their heads for a moment of silence in memory of those who have taken their own lives through suicide in the Nan communities. They've asked the government for long-term funding, such as mental health workers, recreation programs, funding for education, and anything in general to provide to a child.
I believe that our provincial and federal representatives, they have to come and face the realities and see what we are facing. They can't be ignorant to those things anymore. They can't ignore them anymore.
Now is the time for healing. Now is the time for our youth to be heard and to be taken care of. Like, how many lives do we have to go through just to realize that? So I think now is a good time.
The anonymous donor provided $380,000 and stated that he was deeply moved by the suicide crisis. The community began to hire mental health workers to start working with at-risk youth. The Winter Chiefs Assembly continues till Thursday. Molly Fromer, TVT News.
Thunder Bay Superior North MPP Michael Gravel has had a difficult 2017. In February, he went public with his diagnosis with depression and spent almost 7 months out of the public eye. Xiaoli Li has the story.
In a shock announcement Monday afternoon, Michael Gravel revealed he would be temporarily stepping aside from his position as Minister of Northern Development and Mines. The longtime politician, who normally has a smile for everyone, now admits he's been struggling with a feeling of uneasiness he's not been able to shake. In a statement issued today, Gravel said, quote, "My doctor diagnosed me with depression last year. I've been grappling with this disease privately while maintaining to the best of my ability the work that I love to do as minister and MPP. It will take some time, effort, treatment, and understanding to properly address this illness. With your love and support, I know that I will be able to treat this disease and be back to myself." Gravel was first elected to Queen's Park in 1995, representing the old riding of Port Arthur. He was first appointed to the cabinet in 2007 under then-Premier Dalton McGuinty. Premier Kathleen Wynne quickly offered her support for Gravel, issuing a release that says, "It takes great courage to speak publicly about mental health challenges. I want to wish Michael Gravel a speedy and complete recovery. I know that everyone at Queen's Park will have him in their thoughts and will be rooting for him." Until he returns, Gravel's ministerial duties will be handled by fellow Northern MPP and Cabinet Minister Bill Morrow, who already holds the municipal affairs file. Morrow has also issued a statement saying, "I have a tremendous amount of respect for my colleague Michael Gravel and the courage it took to take this step. The most important thing is for him to take the time he needs to regain his health." In his statement, Gravel says he appreciates the importance of talking openly about mental health. For now, he's hoping people will understand that he'd like to maintain his privacy. Xiaoli Li, TVT News.
In March, the town of Fort Frances was rocked by a double homicide that happened at a trailer park. Officers with the Ontario Provincial Police responded to a call on the morning of March 7th and found the bodies of an elderly couple inside their mobile home. Police say 37-year-old Tyler John Cousineau was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. The victims were a 77-year-old man and a 66-year-old woman. Their next-door neighbor, Kathleen Debinetti, says the couple moved to the Fort Francis trailer park from BC about 3 years ago to be closer to family members in the area. The suspect lived in a mobile home right across from them. She took these photos and describes the scene from earlier that morning.
We're putting the crime scene tape up. There were 4 policemen, 3 had rifles and 1 had a dog. They came to my house at about 11:30 and had asked me for our own safety now that my daughter and I needed to leave the trailer park and we could come back after the suspect was in custody.
Cousineau made a court appearance the day after the double murder. However, the overall case has not yet gone to court. The Thunder Bay District Humane Society had many struggles in 2017, and it all started in February during a dog rescue in the Kenora region when an emergency call came in from Long Lac. 30 dogs were located by the OPP and were listed in critical condition. Molly Fromer had this update in March on the dog's condition, their recovery, and the investigation into animal cruelty charges.
On February 7th, Greenstone OPP began investigating a report of neglected dogs located on the Ganuguming First Nation. 15 dogs were rescued at that time, and now another 17 animals have been surrendered to the Thunder Bay and District Humane Society. 43-year-old John O'Nabigan and 45-year-old Gwendolyn O'Nabigan are facing numerous charges of animal cruelty.
On Friday, there was another 17 dogs that were also surrendered to myself while on the property. And these dogs that were surrendered on Friday were pretty close to the same kind of state as the other dogs that were rescued in February.
They're not as bad as the first 12 that we rescued. Their temperament is a little bit better as well. They're not as timid. They're still pretty scared. It's just a new environment and everything like that. And so we're still waiting for them to be officially vet assessed. They've been dewormed and stuff. They've been like a general intake on them. So we're just waiting for 100% to see how their health is.
During the original seizure in February, 3 of the 15 dogs died at the scene. The 12 remaining dogs were taken to the Humane Society and are doing really well, says fundraising coordinator Cassandra Nordell. The 17 that arrived on Friday brings the total number of dogs being taken in by the Humane Society to 29.
They're doing really well. In about 2 months period of time, they have gained 15 to 20 pounds. You guys, I will show you photos of how they were and how they are now, and they look like total different dogs. It's honestly amazing to see. They're still a little bit scared at times, mostly with men, and especially with men with hats, but they're coming around and they're doing really, really well. So we're really happy to finally show you guys who they are and just all of them.
The Humane Society is asking for the public's help at this time. Anyone interested in donating can go to their website. And Nordell says every dollar goes a long way. Molly Fromer, TBT News.
Northern Ontario had its fair share of controversies in 2017, and we'll recap more stories when Northwest Newsweek Year in Review returns after the break. Conservative Senator Lynn Bayak encountered controversy several times this year. The senator from Dryden first made comments in March when she claimed that the good deeds of residential schools are left unacknowledged. Those comments irked many across the country, including Thunder Bay Rainy River MP Don Rusnak. He says the Liberal Indigenous Caucus was shocked and dismayed by the ignorant and harmful comments made by the senator. The caucus requested that Bayak resign from the Indigenous subcommittee and have them interim Conservative leader Rona Ambrose remove her from the party's caucus.
As a government, we're responding to the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it's all of our responsibility, not only to educate others, but to educate ourselves. And again, going back to her position as a sitting senator, especially in this time of reconciliation, that she needs to do better.
Bayak later met with residential school survivors in Sioux Lookout. However, 6 months later, the senator ran into problems once again. She released a statement criticizing the Trudeau government's decision to create a second minister for Indigenous issues. Bayak stated that First Nations people need to trade in their status cards for Canadian citizenship and a fair negotiated payout. Those comments caused officials and organizations to once again call for the senator's resignation. Healthcare continues to be the crux of many issues in the Northwest. The Canadian Union of Public Employees, furious with funding cuts to healthcare in Ontario, held a series of rallies across the province. In May, a large crowd of CUPE members gathered at the Lake of the Woods District Hospital in Kenora to call on the provincial government to change its funding structure to hospitals. Adam Riley has the story.
No real funding improvements for the last 8 years is not acceptable, is it?
An angry crowd of CUPE members rallied outside the Lake of the Woods District Hospital in protest of cuts made by the provincial government to the province's health care. They say Ontario spends 25% less per capita than the rest of the provinces. CUPE Local 822 President Larry Summers says the issues go deeper at Kenora's hospital. The funding model used will punish the hospital for not meeting quotas set by the province.
The problem is, with the type of demographic and population we have here, we can't meet the targets. So we get money at the beginning of the year and the end of the year with targets that we don't reach simply because we don't have the population to support those targets. The money gets clawed out of our budget and leaves us in a deficit position.
Summers says as a result, wards have been moved, beds have been closed, and jobs have been lost, which has angered many, including the president of the Ontario Council of Hospital Unions for CUPE, Michael Hurley.
Unless we mobilize, unless we press, they will continue to cut the budgets. We have the support of all the people in Ontario. All of them want access to hospitals like this one.
Hurley says Ontario's parliamentary budget officer has called the inflation rate for healthcare at 5.3%, but the province hasn't taken that inflation into account for funding.
What's happened, though, is this hospital has been funded at zero, basically, for the last 8 years. And so it's seen its budget contract by about 25% in real terms. So we're asking all three political parties to support funding Ontario's hospitals and long-term care facilities at their real cost.
Hurley says more rallies are planned to take place across the province. The next one will be in Sudbury on June 8th. Adam Riley, TBT News.
For 3 years, a sitting Red Rock councillor was unable to conduct a business in the community's municipal office during regular business hours due to a trespass notice. However, he was still able to attend council meetings for the current term of council. Adam Riley has the details.
Can you understand it? I know you can read it. Does anybody here understand it?
For almost 3 years, Red Rock councillor Lewis Martin has been barred from the municipal building after being served with a notice of trespass. It stems from a pair of incidents in September of 2014 where Martin, then a candidate for council, was accused of harassing the deputy clerk during the filing of his nomination papers. Documents show Martin insinuated the deputy clerk might intentionally make a mistake, preventing him from being elected. After those incidents, Red Rock CAO Cal Pristansky asked Martin to take part in an anti-harassment training, which he allegedly refused.
That left me in the position of having to protect my employee. And basically she felt strongly about this, and I had to switch from the anti-harassment policy to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. That specifically spells out my duties as an employer to do everything reasonable to protect an employee.
Initially, the trespass notice was only for the municipal office, but was extended to the attached library and the rest of the facility. Early last year, Councillor Martin filed a complaint to the Ontario Ombudsman, claiming the notice of trespass was excessive. Martin says there was no recourse for an individual who had a complaint against their municipality until last spring.
So I made a report early in January, whatever it is, and around November of last year, I was told by the Ombudsman that they would be conducting a formal investigation because the Ombudsman Service, they try to get it done without kind of a handshake deal. You get a handshake, everybody's happy, go home. But that didn't happen in this case.
It's a situation that has created high tension for the 5-member council, and that tension bubbled over Monday night when the final report, which has a list of 11 recommendations, including for the immediate lifting of the notice of trespass, was discussed.
I want to know if, at the very least, are you willing to apologize to her for that? Because obviously she didn't do the things you accused her of. You got elected.
It's gone on way too long, and I'm embarrassed, frankly. And you should be too, because you're just as involved in it as we are.
At this time, Martin refuses to apologize. Mayor Gary Nelson says matters could get even more complicated this fall as Prestansky is set to retire and the deputy clerk will be taking his place.
I don't really know what's going to happen there, whether he'll be allowed to at the meeting and address all his questions to me and nothing to Nancy. We'll just have to wait and see. It's a simple apology. Anybody can do that. You walk in and say, I'm sorry for what happened. It won't happen again. And maybe that's all it's going to take to stop this.
Adam Riley, TBT News.
And an update on that story. As of the end of 2017, the recommendations from the Ombudsperson's office have been fulfilled. The notice on trespass on Councillor Martin has been lifted, and Martin Stell has not apologized. Well, we're going to take a short break, but next we recap consultations to increase the amount of political representation in the region. Stay with us. A major shift is in store for the boundaries in the upcoming provincial election. In 2018, there will be 2 new ridings in the far north, consisting of regions that currently make up Kenora-Rainy River and Timmins-James Bay. The boundaries of those ridings and the communities they encompass were up for debate at a series of consultations being conducted by the province. Adam Riley attended a session in Sioux Lookout and files this report.
The next provincial election is just a year away, and as candidates ready themselves for a major showdown, residents in some sections of Northern Ontario will be checking to see what riding they'll be living in. 2 years ago, the province amended the Representation Act to increase the number of northern ridings by a maximum of 2. That led to the creation of the Far North Electoral Boundaries Commission, overseen by Justice Joyce Pelletier. She says the response to the commission has been varied, but all the comments are important.
We are seeing more response from those who are living in the far north of the electoral districts or along the potential boundary lines. Sioux Lookout being one, Lac Seul being another. And then on the Timmins side, the communities along the Highway 11 corridor and the far north.
This is the makeup of the current ridings: Kenora, Rainy River, and Timmins, James Bay. So far, there are 5 suggestions as to how the ridings will be reorganized. 2 of the plans will see the creation of 2 new ridings, and 3 will result in 1. On Tuesday, 15 residents from the region came out to the session held in Sioux Lookout. Most notably was Kenora Rainy River MPP Sarah Campbell. Her riding will drastically shrink as a result of any of the current suggestions. She says she's all in favor of the redistribution.
It's actually something that I mentioned to the chief electoral officer after the last election. It doesn't take very long to realize that there's a democratic deficit that exists in Kenora Rainy River, and I really believe that we need to increase Indigenous representation in the Ontario legislature, and I think this is one of the best ways.
The commission will complete its consultation tour by the beginning of next month and will be returning to Kenora for a second meeting in hopes of receiving more feedback from the First Nations communities in that area.
We started out the consultation with going to the NAN Chief Spring Assembly in Timmins in early May and received a good reception there. We then went and did the same thing with the Grand Council Treaty Number 3, because both of those First Nation provincial territorial organizations are impacted by this, or potentially impacted by this.
At Sioux Lookout session, one of the key points residents stressed to the commission was the need to take population density out of the equation, as well as to guarantee there be representation of the First Nation communities in the north. Adam Riley, TBT News.
And in October, the province officially updated the Representation Act, increasing the total number of electoral districts in Ontario from 107 to 124, which includes the 2 Northern Ontario ridings. Well, a major announcement and victory this year for residents of Grassy Narrows, as the province committed $85 million to the cleanup of the mercury contamination at Grassy Narrows First Nation north of Kenora. The contamination of the English and Wabigoon river systems in the 1960s and 70s from the pulp and paper mill in Dryden has been the cause of many health issues for residents of the First Nation. The Environment Minister, Glenn Murray, says the money will be going towards the design and implementation of the cleanup. Grassy Narrows Chief Simon Forbister says this is a dream come true for the community, adding there are several initiatives being undertaken as part of the process that includes locating and neutralizing hotspots of contamination along the river system and addressing the contamination from the mill.
To put in a water filtration system, at the dump site to remove, any mercury residue that's coming out from the site. That's part of the plan.
Forbister hopes the cleanup will begin by next spring or summer and believes it could take up to 10 years to complete. In December, the province secured the funding into a trust, preventing it from being reallocated to another project. Well, that'll do it for part 1 of Northwest Newsweek Year in Review. Join us next week when we'll recap several major announcements that will impact the region's economy heading into the new year 2018.